I sat there frozen, holding my glass of wine halfway to my lips. The sound of her voice still echoed in my ears. I'm pregnant with Ethan's child. My fingers went numb, and the glass slipped slightly, clinking against the plate. For a moment, I thought maybe I had misheard her. Maybe it was some cruel joke or misunderstanding. But when I looked up at Ethan, his face told me everything. His eyes dropped to the table, and his hands started to shake. People at nearby tables had turned to look at us. I could hear the faint sound of someone's fork hitting a plate. My chest felt tight, and the air in the restaurant suddenly grew heavy. I looked at Lila. She was standing tall, calm, and confident, like she knew exactly what she was doing. Her eyes flickered between me and Ethan, and I could see a small tremor in her hands. Ethan tried to speak. Mara, please let me explain. Explain what? I asked, my voice quiet but shaking. That you've been cheating on me? That this woman is carrying your child. He said my name again, but I couldn't listen anymore. 10 years of marriage. 10 years of love, fights, promises, and shared dreams. All reduced to this moment. I looked at the man I thought I knew, and he felt like a stranger. I felt my heart break, not in one clean crack, but in 1,000 tiny pieces that cut deeper with every breath. I stood up slowly, the chair scraping against the floor. You don't need to explain, I said softly. Everything I need to know is standing right in front of me. Lila looked down, maybe realizing this wasn't going the way she expected. Ethan reached for my hand, but I stepped back. I didn't shout or cry. I just turned around and walked toward the exit. The cold air outside hit me like a slap. My legs felt weak, but I kept walking. The city lights blurred through my tears. I walked for what felt like hours, not even sure where I was going. I didn't want to go home, not to our house filled with his lies. I ended up sitting in my car, staring out the windshield, my mind blank. All I could think about was how just an hour ago, I was smiling at him, believing we were happy. I had worn the dress he said he loved. I had even written him a note earlier that day, thanking him for choosing me all those years ago. Now, that same man had chosen someone else. As I sat there in silence, I realized the truth I'd been avoiding for years. Ethan hadn't been mine for a long time. I'd just been holding on to the memory of who he used to be. And in that moment, I sat in my car outside my childhood home, the engine still running, the headlights cutting across the empty driveway. The place hadn't changed much. The same white porch, the same mailbox with the peeling paint. I hadn't been back in years, but somehow, I ended up here, like my heart knew where it needed to go when everything else fell apart. I turned off the engine and sat there for a while, listening to the quiet. My hands were still trembling. I tried to steady my breathing, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan's face at that table. The guilt, the panic, the way he couldn't even look at me. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel and let out a shaky breath. It felt unreal, like I was watching someone else's life crumble. When I finally got out of the car, the night air was cool. The key was still under the flower pot, exactly where Mom used to hide it. I opened the door and stepped inside. The smell of old wood and lavender hit me instantly. I could almost hear her humming in the kitchen, making tea like she used to whenever I had a bad day. For the first time in years, I wished she were here to tell me what to do. I sank onto the old couch, pulled the throw blanket around me, and stared at the dark ceiling. The silence was heavy, but it was also peaceful. No lies, no noise, no pretending. My phone buzzed on the table. Ethan's name lit up the screen again and again, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. I didn't want to hear his voice. I didn't want another excuse. After a while, I turned the phone off completely. The world could wait. I just needed to breathe. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My reflection in the window caught me off guard. I looked like a stranger. My makeup had smudged, my hair was a mess, and my eyes were red and swollen. But behind the exhaustion, there was something new, a stillness. Maybe strength. I sat by the window and looked out at the quiet street. I remembered being a little girl, sitting on that same porch with Mom, watching the stars. She used to say, "You can't control what people do, sweetheart. You can only control what you do next." Her words hit me harder than ever. I didn't know what next would look like, but I knew it wouldn't involve Ethan. I wasn't ready to think about divorce or forgiveness or anything yet. I just needed to exist. As the night deepened, I pulled the blanket tighter around me and closed my eyes. My world had shattered just hours ago, but for the first time that night, I wasn't falling apart. I was finally still. Knew something inside me had changed forever. There was no going back. The knock on the door came early in the morning. I hadn't slept all night. My eyes felt heavy, my mind still replaying every word from the night before. When I looked through the window and saw Ethan standing there, my stomach tightened. He looked tired, his hair messy, his shirt wrinkled like he hadn't been home either. I didn't want to open the door, but I did, maybe out of habit, maybe out of shock. The moment I stepped aside, he rushed in, his voice already breaking. "Mara, please listen to me," he said. His eyes were red, his hands shaking. It was a mistake. It happened once. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I just stood there, watching him fall apart. He kept talking, words tumbling out, excuses, half-truths, desperate promises. He said it happened months ago, when we'd had that big fight about me working too much. He claimed he was lonely, that he wasn't thinking straight. He said Lila meant nothing to him. I wanted to believe him, I really did. 10 years of marriage doesn't disappear overnight. A part of me wanted to find some reason, some piece of him I could still hold on to. But as I watched him talk, I realized something painful. I didn't recognize him anymore. The man in front of me wasn't the one who used to make me laugh, who used to hold me when life got hard. This man was a stranger, scared of losing control over the life he broke himself. He reached for my hand, but I stepped back. You lied to me, Ethan, I said quietly. You let another woman walk into our life and destroy it. How do you expect me to come back from that? He started crying harder, saying he loved me, saying we could fix it. He talked about raising the baby together, about starting over. That was the moment my heart finally went cold. How could he stand there and talk about a future that began with betrayal? He didn't even understand what he had done to me. I told him to leave. He didn't move at first, so I pointed toward the door. Go, Ethan, I said, keeping my voice steady even though my chest felt tight. You made your choices. Now I'm making mine. He stood there for a moment, his lips trembling, like he wanted to say something else. But he didn't. He just nodded weakly and walked out. The door closed behind him with a quiet click, and I stood there staring at the handle. When the silence settled again, I felt tears roll down my face. Not because I still loved him, but because I finally understood the truth. The marriage I'd been fighting for had already ended long before. 3 days passed before I heard from her. I was sitting on the porch, drinking coffee, trying to quiet my thoughts when my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Hi, it's Lila. Please don't block me. I just need to talk. My first reaction was anger. I didn't want to see her, didn't want to hear another word about what she had done. But curiosity and something deeper, maybe a need for answers, made me reply. We agreed to meet at a small cafe downtown that afternoon. When I walked in, she was already there, sitting near the window. She looked younger than I remembered from that night, maybe mid-20s. Her hands were wrapped around a cup of coffee she wasn't drinking, and when she saw me, she looked nervous. For a moment, I almost turned around and left, but I forced myself to sit down. Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, she broke the silence. I didn't mean for things to happen like this, she said softly. I just thought you deserved to know the truth. I looked at her carefully. The truth? I repeated. You already told me enough. She shook her head. No, I mean about what he told me. Her voice trembled a little. Ethan said you two were basically done. He told me you were cold, distant, and that he stayed with you out of guilt. He said he loved me, that he was going to leave you and start over with. Her words hit like a slow burn. I didn't flinch, but inside, it hurt to know what he'd said behind my back. All those years, I had given everything to that man, my love, my trust, my time, and he had turned me into a villain in his story. Lila's eyes filled with tears. I believed him, she whispered. He made me think I was special. But after I told him about the baby, he changed. He started avoiding me. I thought maybe you two worked things out, and that's why he disappeared. I just wanted to understand what was going on. I listened quietly. She was trembling, and I could tell she hadn't come to gloat. She was scared, not just of what she'd done, but of what she had gotten herself into. When she looked at me, I saw regret in her eyes. Still, it didn't erase the pain she had caused. I didn't feel pity, but I did feel something unexpected, a strange sense of clarity. Ethan hadn't just betrayed me. He had built a web of lies for both of us. He used her to fill the emptiness he refused to face in himself. When I stood up to leave, she asked quietly, "Do you hate me?" I looked at her for a moment before answering. "No," I said softly, "but I'll never forgive him for making both of us believe his lies." Then I walked out of the cafe, feeling the first hint of strength return to my chest. For the first time since that night, I wasn't just broken, I was awake. Lila ever walked into that restaurant. I'd just been too blind to see it. The day I told Ethan to leave, it was raining. The sound of it hitting the windows filled the silence between us. He stood in the living room with a small bag in his hand, looking lost. I had already packed the rest of his things and placed them by the door. My voice was calm, almost too calm, when I said, "You need to go." He tried to argue at first, saying we could fix things, but I didn't let him speak for long. I had made up my mind. There was nothing left to say. The man I once trusted with everything had destroyed it all. I wasn't going to let him stay another night in the house I had worked so hard to build. When the door closed behind him, I stood there for a long time, listening to the rain and the faint echo of my own breathing. My heart still hurt, but something inside me had shifted. The sadness was still there, but it was changing into something sharper, anger. I spent the next few days going through our finances, trying to make sense of everything. That's when I saw the transfers. Money missing from our joint account. Large amounts sent to a name I didn't recognize at first. Then it hit me, Lila. Each transaction told a story. The rent for her apartment, medical payments for prenatal visits, even furniture expenses. I sat there staring at the screen, my hands shaking, realizing that he had used my earnings, the money from my extra hours at work, the money I had saved for our future, to take care of the woman who had ruined our marriage. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was theft. I felt a surge of rage I had never known before. I picked up my phone and called the bank. Within an hour, I froze every joint account, canceled his cards, and transferred my portion of savings into a new account under my name only. I wasn't going to let him use another dollar of mine. Then I called a locksmith. By evening, every lock in the house was changed. His keys were useless now. I didn't tell him. I wanted him to find out when he tried to walk back in. That night, as I filled out the paperwork for legal separation, my hands stopped trembling. I had cried for days, but now there were no tears left. Just focus. Determination. I knew the road ahead would be long, court hearings, lawyers, paperwork, but I didn't care. He had taken my trust, my peace, and my savings, but he wasn't going to take my strength. When I finally closed my laptop, I looked around the quiet house. It felt different. Emptier, yes, but somehow safer. For the first time in weeks, I took a deep breath. Ethan was out of my life, and though my world was still cracked, I was finally taking control of it. I spent the next few days in silence, trying to figure out what to do next. The anger that had kept me going was still there, but it had changed into something more focused. I didn't want to scream or destroy things anymore. I wanted to make him face what he had done. Not through chaos, but through truth. I started by gathering every piece of information I could find. Bank statements, tax returns, old receipts, anything that could help me understand where our money had gone. The more I looked, the more I uncovered. He hadn't just spent money on Lila's apartment. There were hotel charges from different cities, gifts, and unexplained withdrawals. Every document felt like another betrayal laid bare. I called my friend Claire, who worked as a paralegal at a small law firm. She had known me for years and didn't ask many questions. When I told her what happened, she said quietly, "Then we'll do this right. You'll need proof, everything in writing." So every night, I sat at the dining table surrounded by papers, sorting them into piles. One for personal expenses, one for joint accounts, and one for his secret spending. It took hours, but with each piece of evidence, I felt stronger. I wasn't just a heartbroken wife anymore. I was a woman preparing to take back control. Claire came over on the weekend to help me organize everything. We made copies, highlighted transactions, and matched dates to messages I had saved. That's when we found it, a second credit card in his name, one he had never told me about. The bills were full of expensive dinners, jewelry, and hotel stays. There was even one charge from a jewelry store a month before our anniversary. My stomach turned. While I had been planning a celebration, he had been buying her a gift. "Keep everything," Claire said. "You'll need it for court. Judges don't ignore paper trails." By the time we were done, I had a thick folder filled with evidence, his lies written in numbers and receipts. I looked at it and felt a strange mix of pain and relief. Every page hurt, but it was also proof that I wasn't crazy, that all the late nights, the distance, the unexplained expenses had meaning. That night, I sat in bed with the folder beside me. I thought about how much I had changed in just a few weeks. A month ago, I would have begged him to tell the truth. Now, I didn't need his words. I had facts, and they were stronger than any excuse he could ever give. I wasn't planning to ruin him out of spite. I was planning to make him face the truth he had tried so hard to hide. He thought he could lie his way out of everything. But this time, I was ready to make sure he couldn't lie his way past me. For the first time since it all began, I felt calm, not because it was over, but because I finally had a plan. And deep down, I knew this was just the beginning of my fight back. The day of the mediation felt heavy, but I was ready. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, organizing every document, every piece of proof. I wasn't walking into that room as the broken woman who had cried herself to sleep. I was walking in as someone who finally knew her worth. The office was cold and quiet, with neutral walls and polite smiles from people who didn't know our story. Ethan was already there when I arrived, sitting beside his lawyer. He looked nervous, tired, and smaller than I remembered. For a second, I almost felt sorry for him. Then I remembered what he had done. The lies, the stolen money, the betrayal, and any trace of sympathy disappeared. I sat across from him, placed my folder neatly on the table, and met his eyes. He tried to smile, maybe to soften me, but it didn't work. His lawyer started the meeting, talking about finding middle ground and amicable resolutions. I let him speak until it was my turn. When I finally opened my folder, the sound of the paper sliding across the table felt louder than anything else in the room. I handed copies to both lawyers. Inside were months of records, receipts, screenshots, and statements that showed everything Ethan had tried to hide. The second credit card, the hotel bookings, the jewelry, the money transfers to Lila. Every secret laid out in black and white. His lawyer flipped through the pages, and I could see his expression change from confident to concerned. He whispered something to Ethan, who looked down, his jaw tight. He tried to interrupt me, saying, "Mara, please, we don't need to do this here." I leaned back slightly, keeping my voice calm. "Oh, but we do," I said, "because this is the only place where the truth actually matters." He looked at me, lost for words. I continued, pointing to the files. "You used our money, Ethan. You built a life with someone else while pretending to keep this one together. I may have been your wife, but I'm not your fool." The room went completely silent. Even his lawyer didn't know what to say. After that, the rest of the meeting was short. My lawyer spoke for me, and I didn't have to say much else. Everything was in the documents. There was no denying it, no twisting the story. Ethan sat there, staring at the table, while his lawyer tried to manage the damage. When it was over, I stood up, gathered my things, and walked out. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. For the first time in a long time, I felt steady. Outside, the air was warm and bright. I took a deep breath and realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. That day, I didn't. The weeks after the mediation moved faster than I expected. The papers were signed, and the separation became official. Ethan lost more than he thought he would. Half of his savings, the house, and the life he had built on lies. Watching him realize the cost of his choices didn't bring me joy, but it brought a quiet kind of peace. Justice had been served, not through revenge, but through truth. He tried to reach out a few times, mostly through emails. They were full of regret, long messages about how he'd made mistakes and wanted to make things right. I never replied. I had spent too long listening to his words. Now, I only cared about actions, and his had already spoken loud enough. Months later, I heard from Claire that Lila had given birth to a baby boy. She was living alone now because Ethan wasn't around anymore. Apparently, she found out he had been seeing another woman from his office. The same pattern, the same lies, just with someone new. When I heard that, I felt nothing. It wasn't satisfaction or pity. It was simply confirmation of what I already knew. Some people don't change. They just move on to the next person willing to believe them. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding. I stayed in the house, but I made changes. New furniture, new colors, new energy. I wanted the space to feel like mine, not a reminder of what had been. Every morning, I woke up and did something that made me feel whole again. A walk, a cup of coffee on the porch, a call with Claire, even just cleaning in silence. Healing came slowly, but it came. Work became my anchor. I started taking on more projects and pouring my energy into things that gave me purpose. My clients noticed the change in me, calm, confident, focused. I wasn't pretending anymore. I wasn't the woman covering up cracks in her life with smiles. I was just me learning how to live without fear. Ethan's name rarely came up after that. When it did, it was usually in passing, through someone who mentioned he had moved out of state for a job. I didn't ask for details. He had become part of a story I had already finished reading. One evening, I found myself standing on the porch again, watching the sunset. The air smelled like rain, and everything was quiet. I thought about how far I had come, from that night in the restaurant to this moment of stillness. The pain hadn't disappeared, but it no longer controlled me. It had shaped me instead. Losing Ethan didn't break me, it revealed me. I learned that peace doesn't come from fixing broken people. It comes from finally walking away from them. And as the sun dipped below the trees, I realized I wasn't rebuilding the life I lost. I was building a new one entirely, one that was finally mine. Just expose his lies. I took back the power he thought he had taken from me. A year passed faster than I expected. The pain that once felt endless had slowly turned into something softer, something that pushed me forward instead of holding me back. I had spent that time rebuilding not just my life, but myself. Piece by piece, I found who I was without Ethan, and she turned out to be stronger than I ever imagined. For years, I had dreamed about starting my own interior design business, but I'd always held back, telling myself it wasn't the right time. After everything that happened, I stopped waiting for the right time. I took a chance, registered my business, and started working from a small studio space downtown. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. Every design, every idea, every color choice reflected my freedom. In the beginning, work was slow. I took small projects, living rooms, cafes, a few office spaces. But word spread, and soon my name started to circulate in the area. People loved my attention to detail and the personal touch I brought to every design. For the first time in years, I felt proud of something again. Then one morning, an email landed in my inbox that made me stop and stare. A restaurant owner wanted to renovate his place and was interested in hiring me. The name of the restaurant made my heart skip. It was the same one where my life had shattered the year before. I read the message twice, maybe 3 times, unsure how to feel. I could have turned it down. I could have avoided the memories that still lived in that place. But deep down, I knew this was something I needed to do. When I walked into the restaurant for the first time in over a year, I felt a strange mix of emotions. The layout was the same corner tables, the same soft lighting, but it no longer had power over me. The pain that once lived there was gone. It was just a building now, waiting to be transformed. I stood in the middle of the dining room, holding the blueprints, and smiled. Life really had come full circle. The place that once broke me was now giving me a new beginning. I could almost picture my past self sitting at that table, unaware of what was coming. If only she could see me now, calm, steady, and in control. As I started painting the walls, the smell of fresh color filled the air. Every brushstroke felt like a quiet victory. I wasn't erasing the past, I was reclaiming it. When the renovation was done, the owner thanked me for giving his restaurant a new life. I smiled and thought to myself, it wasn't just the restaurant that had been reborn. It was me. That day, I locked the door after finishing the final touch and looked around one last time. The woman who had once walked out. Months later, when life had finally settled into something calm and steady, I came home one afternoon to find a letter in my mailbox. It had no return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from Ethan. For a moment, I just stood there, holding it in my hands, unsure if I even wanted to open it. Part of me felt curious, but another part of me wondered what more there was left to say. Still, I sat down and read it. The letter was long, filled with apologies and regret. Ethan wrote that he'd been foolish, that he didn't realize what he had until it was gone. He said losing me was the biggest mistake of his life, that he thought about me every day, and that he hoped I was happy. He ended it by saying he didn't expect forgiveness, but he wanted me to know he was sorry. I read the letter twice, slowly, then folded it and set it aside. There were no tears this time, no anger, no shaking hands, just silence and peace. Because the truth was, I didn't need his apology anymore. I had already moved on, already healed in ways he could never understand. That evening, I took my glass of wine and sat on the porch as the sun dipped low behind the trees. The air was warm, the world quiet. I watched the sky turn shades of gold and pink, and for the first time in a long while, I felt completely free. Ethan had taken so much from me, trust, stability, years of my life, but what he could never take was my strength. I had rebuilt from the ground up, found purpose in the ruins he left behind. And in that quiet moment, I realized something important. Closure doesn't always come from an apology. It comes from choosing peace over pain, from letting go instead of holding on. I didn't write back to him. There was nothing left to say. He was a chapter one had finished, one that had taught me lessons about love, betrayal, and self-worth. I had no desire to reopen it. My life now was filled with new beginnings, new energy, and people who valued me for who I truly was. As I sat there, sipping my wine, I thought about the woman I had been a year ago, broken, lost, and full of questions. I wanted to tell her that one day she would smile again, that she would find peace in places she never expected. Sometimes, revenge isn't loud or dramatic. It's quiet. It's the peace that comes when you no longer care whether the person who hurt you ever understands what they did. It's living well, moving forward, and knowing you came out stronger. That night, I watched the last bit of sunlight fade from the sky and whispered to myself, I forgive you, not for him, but for me. Because forgiveness wasn't about letting him off the hook. It was about setting myself free. Of this place, and tears had come back to rebuild it. And she did.